Thanks, Andy. I think it's both a blessing and a curse to go last. It's a blessing because you get to watch all the talks that have come before you, and that kind of informs some of the narrative that you'll see in my presentation. And a curse because, as Andy said, I'm the blocker between you and Party Town. So I'll try and whiz through this as quickly as I possibly can. So let's start with the formal bit. There's me looking all arty and important. But I am the co-founder and CEO of Uforika. We are essentially an entertainment company. We focus on a few different areas, one of them being gaming, specifically innovation in game engine technology. And we have a fantastic collaboration studio called Equinox Studios, who are Manchester-based. And we also diversify our go-to-market by looking at immersive storytelling and digital experiences. So I thought I'd start, which actually is now very relevant given all the talk we've just had, with a bit of a recap, as in, why are we even bothering? Why are we even talking about this concept of Web3 community? What's the point? Well, let's go back to the beginning, as in the last bit of the beginning, Web 2. Okay, this is where we are now. I'm not going to teach you to suck eggs here, but a lot of focus on read and write, big tech owning all of your data, all of that very centralized, looking at a server-to-client architecture. So obviously, that is the catalyst that is moving us towards the desire to get to this, Web 3. So we move from read and write to read, write, and own, utilizing distributed ledger, blockchain technologies, mitigating that centralized ownership, so you get to then take ownership of your data as the user. Josh was just alluding to that in the last presentation, but that ultimately, that is the point. That is the point of all of this, right? So when we think about the virtual world, how is this all going to manifest itself? So Simon and I, when we first got here this evening, Simon Benson down here, we were having a discussion just outside, and ultimately our discussion is pretty much everything you're going to see in these next few slides. So we're already in the virtual world. I mean, that's obvious. We're already interacting with smart devices. All of the presentations you've heard this evening are all focusing on how we're going to exist in the virtual world and how Web3 is going to inform that, and how you as users and communities are going to partake in that ecosystem. So what are some of the words and the ingredients that make up the virtual world that we're now becoming very, very familiar with? So we have metaverse. Metaverse getting a bit of a negative rap right now. I don't think that's fair. I think it's back to the comments we were talking about earlier about people not really understanding the technological benefits that these words mean and everything that goes behind it. I believe that metaverse will be an ecosystem of many different platforms. Josh referenced interoperability a second ago. I think we're going to see an awful lot of that. And that is going to inform verticals like Web3 gaming. And this leads us into concepts then of asset ownership. So we then have to start thinking about things like spatial computing. And if anybody saw the recent Apple launch, Vision Pro, you will have noticed they didn't talk about metaverse, they didn't talk about blockchain, they didn't talk about crypto, they didn't really talk about VR, they referred to it as spatial computing. The convergence of hardware meeting our personal lives in the way in which we're going to now interact in a virtual world, in a professional setting, VR, XR, AR, so on and so forth. So then we start to have to think about digital identity. And what is that going to mean for us? And how are we going to start using some of these mechanisms to present ourselves in the virtual world? So that then brings us to NFTs. And it's all back to data ownership. That's the key element that we're discussing here when we think about how all of these things are going to play together. So what does this mean for community, and what of all of these ingredients are going to be really important? Well, the answer is it's all important. All of the things that I've just mentioned are all going to play a part in the way that we adapt and evolve as we move into virtual worlds. And it kind of got me thinking about the definition of community. And I forget who it was, but I think it was the second presentation of the evening, did a similar thing, and we had the definition of community. But the one that I really like is this one, which also comes from the Oxford Dictionary definition of community, but it's a group of people living together and practicing common ownership. And the reason I like this particular quote is for these two words, practicing ownership. Because it's user choice, right? However the user wants to interact with these worlds is going to define how they evolve, how they adapt, and the data they take ownership of, and how they use that data in their data. So what does practicing ownership actually look like? And this is where we start to now move to identity mechanics, and some of the things that I think we're going to see a lot more of as this evolves. Here's a stat for you. 64.4% of the global population is online. So that equates to 5.18 billion people. That is a lot of people. So how are we going to get all of those people moving in to an ecosystem that advocates for Web3 when we think about the community? Well, the first place to start is DIDs, decentralized identifiers. So if you don't know what these are, these essentially are passports, or you could think of it as a driving license that's going to enable you to verify yourself in a virtual world. And there's a number of ways that you could think about this, but ultimately it's removing that element of centralization, and you don't have to be filtered through a centralized entity like Google or Facebook, for example. So where might you use DIDs? Well, you might use them when you're trying to access a marketplace, a social network, a metaverse. Anywhere that needs user verification, this is where DIDs are going to come into play. And then we have avatars. Nothing strange about avatars to the gaming community. Avatars being used for years and years and years. But there's a really interesting thing about avatars when we start to think about how you as users can utilize them, particularly if you're a casual user, a casual gamer perhaps. How can you use an avatar imaginatively and creatively to present yourself in a virtual world in a way that wouldn't normally be possible in real life? In real life, I walk into a room, this is how I look, this is who I am, I can't change that. In the virtual world, you can do whatever you want to do because you're in a virtual world. And that leads to interesting business models when we think about assets, customization, different skins, etc., etc., etc. But that avatar, however you choose to customize that and represent yourself in the virtual world, can then link back to your DID. So we're starting to build up a picture here of how we're going to use some of these mechanics. And then we come to NFTs, the technical standard that supports verified ownership via blockchain. And this actually is really interesting in itself because it can lead to all types of enhanced community involvement. Think about all of those NFTs that users and owners use as profile pictures through social networks. Now, yes, sometimes that will get a bad rap and we hear about cartoon JPEGs and so on and so forth. But actually, what that is actually doing for the user, it is showcasing their fandom, their engagement with a particular IP or a particular community. And that ultimately, by definition, then starts to scale that community. And it's back to some of the topics we were hearing about earlier on this evening. And lastly, I just wanted to touch on SBT, soul-bound tokens. So this is obviously a different kind of standard, non-tradable. But what this can do is enable the user to have verified certifications and accreditations. And there are plenty of use cases from an identity perspective of where this would be relevant and how this could then present you with a verified Web3 CV, because that's the way that you could essentially think about it. So education institutions could deliver a degree certificate to you as a soul-bound token. Professional organizations could deliver professional accreditations and training accreditations to you via soul-bound token, which then can be verified so you have what you say you have. And these are all varying levels of ingredients that I believe will make up the identity mechanics that we will see as we start to move, adapt, and evolve into more and more virtual worlds. So that is the vision. But there is an awful lot of work to do. So I've painted a picture and showed you some of the parts of the puzzle, but there are an awful lot of other parts of that jigsaw that need to come together to make the realization that we have for Web3 virtual worlds a reality. And an awful lot of technical work needs to happen to make all this seamless for the user. Because at the end of the day, and again, this is a discussion I've had a lot this evening, it's all about the user experience. We have to make sure that all of these mechanics work seamlessly for the user because everybody wants it to be easy. But that will take time. This will not happen overnight. But when we get there, the benefits will outweigh all of that work that's gone before. So another way to think about it is like this, and I particularly like this image. Partly because I don't necessarily agree with it. So I don't really agree with we've all done everything wrong in the past. It's all been a complete disaster. We need to rip it up and start again. My view is that actually we're at a defining moment where we get to look back and see where we could have done things differently, and then take a more progressive, forward-thinking vision around how we can make the user experience better and make the benefits better for the user in the long term. So considering all of that, sometimes I think it's good practice to take a look back at where we've been to figure out where we're going. And the good news is there's an awful lot of talented builders, founders, technologists in the space that are working to make this happen. And a lot of them are in the room tonight, and Manchester is very lucky to have that ecosystem right here on our doorstep. One thing I am very certain of, though, is that community is going to be at the core of evolving the space. And that is going to be very, very exciting for the future. Thank you very much.